Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Pappison, Chapter 12, The Path to Great Answers. So, the last few sections we've been focusing on, well, no pun intended, the focusing question. And in this chapter, we're going to be talking about answers, but not without still talking about the question first, and specifically the types of questions, the types of focusing questions that you can ask yourself to then get what you want out of life or get to the answer that you are looking for, and how we exactly get to that answer. So, if you guys remember, the focusing question was, do you guys remember what it was? It was, what's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And we talked about how you can ask this question in multiple facets of your life, right? So you could ask this question for your business, for your job that you're working in, for your spiritual life, for your relationship, for your finances, etc. So you don't necessarily have to just have like this one thing, overarching thing for your whole life and your whole day. You're just on one thing, but it's more like you have one things for multiple facets of your life. And I'll tell you guys, this is what I do. I have, goals for Chee-Tash. I have goals for at work. I have, goals for jujitsu, etc. Multiple facets of my life. All right. So the path to great answers. Well, in order to get a great answer, Gary says you need a great question. And we already talked about the focusing question is really the ultimate question but within that focusing question, there are different flavors of the focusing question. Or different flavors. This is Baskin Robbins. Yeah. I had some ice cream last night, so I'm going to use that. Flavors. We have different flavors, different types of the focusing question. So, Gary breaks them up into these 4 quadrants. He's got this circle, right? And the circle's got 4 quadrants. So they each have different poles of the circle, right? Where one pole is big and small. So the size of the question, I guess, but really like the breadth of the question. And then you've got on the other pole, on the other axis, you've got broad and specific, or like the depth. I guess that makes sense. The sky's the scope, the size, and then the scope of your question. So you've got big and small, and then broad and specific. So Gary says the focusing question should focus in one of these quadrants. And which quadrant do you think it should focus in? Well, think about everything that we've talked about and thinking big. Remember, we talked about you want to have big thinking. You want to set a high threshold, set the bar very high, push yourself a little bit. So, okay, we could say that big is where we want to be in this quadrant. And if you guys, I probably should have drawn a picture of this, but that's kind of what it looks like right there. If you guys can see that. Sorry, maybe I should have posted a picture in this PowerPoint. That would have maybe been a little bit better. Okay, so we want to be big. We don't want to be small. Now, what about broad and specific? Do we want to be broad? Well, think about what the focusing question asks. What's the one thing? Do we want to be broad? Is having a one thing broad? I would say no. I would say that's pretty specific. And we've talked about before, on to-do lists and dwindling down your to-do list to one thing. So we don't want to be broad. We want to be specific. So really, Gary says the magic really happens in the big and specific quadrant. Large mounting task that's super specific. Asking of yourself a lot for just one thing. But he goes into the other quadrants here. So they're small and specific. And he says there's nothing really challenging about small and specific. So he gives an example of this. What can I do to increase sales by 5% this year? This aims you in a specific direction, right? Because you're saying, okay, 5%. That's pretty specific. It's not very broad. It's not like you're saying, oh, I just want to increase sales this year. Yeah, but like how much? That doesn't really answer any sort of question. So at least you're specific, but you're kind of maybe a little bit small and not setting that bar really that high. Gary says for most salespeople, 5% bump in sales could just as easily happen because the market shifted in your favor rather than anything you might have done. I remember a scene from The Sopranos where I think Junior Soprano says, you get credit for anything in this economy, just by nature of markets going up on their own. I forget the exact context of it, but yeah, so small and specific, at least you're specific. You're saying the 5%, but you're setting the bar too low. Because that 5% increase might happen by forces outside of your control. Maybe your product ends up being just an outstanding product. So the product kind of sells itself. So you get that 5% just based on product reputation, not on anything that you're doing. So let's take a look at the other one. They're small and then broad. This is probably like the worst area to be in because, again, you're thinking small. What can I do to increase sales? This is kind of like an example question that you would ask. It's not really an achievement question at all, says Gary. It's more of a brainstorming question. You need more narrowing down. How much should I increase sales by? By what date? What do I want to increase sales in? What product? So you can do way more narrowing down in this question. And it's really just an average question. This is the part of the quadrant where you kind of don't really want to be in, small and broad. The next one, what can I do? The next one, big and broad. So an example, what can I do to double sales? Okay, we just went from small and specific where we say, okay, I want to increase sales by 5%. Now we're saying, okay, double sales. Okay, now you're thinking big. But it's still a little bit too broad. You're asking yourself a big question, but nothing specific. It's a good start, but the lack of specifics leaves more questions than answers. Because doubling sales is great, but what's your timeline? Doubling sales in the next 20 years is very different than doubling your sales in the same year, says Gary. So you still got to narrow this down and get really specific. And that's where we get to the last quadrant, big and specific. What can I do to double sales in 6 months? Now, says Gary, you have all the elements of a great question. You've got the magnitude with the timeline. Double sales, but the next slide, there we go, find a great answer. So first, ask a great question. Next, find a great answer. And there's 3 categories, 3 flavors to a great answer. There's doable, there's stretch, and there's possibility. If you want the most from your answer, you must realize that it lives outside of your comfort zone, says Gary. A big answer is never in plain view, nor is the path to finding one laid out for you. A possibility answer exists beyond what is already known and being done. So these three categories of answers. There's doable, which is stuff that's already within your reach, stuff that's already possible. Then there's stretch, which is you're doing things that are possible, but it's at the farthest end of your capabilities. So it's going to take a little more effort on your part to achieve some things. Then there's possibility. That's the outer limits, beyond what is known or currently being done. And this is kind of where you want to live when you're trying to find answers to those great questions. It's in these outer limits. A great answer is a new answer. It's a leap. It's something different. You want to live in possibility. Just like when we're talking about a great question, you want to live in the big and specific quadrant. Here, this is not as much of a quadrant, but more so a zone. You want to live in the possibility zone. So you want to live in big and specific quadrant. And the possibility zone is going to take some thinking. It's going to research. You want to search for clues. And Gary talks about doing this thing called benchmarking and trending. So when you benchmark, you're kind of, well, let me go to the next slide, but you're kind of asking this question, has anyone else studied or accomplished this or something like it? So that's what benchmarking is. You're researching what came before you, learning from others, so you establish that base case, like, okay, here's how people have doubled sales in the last 6 months from previous examples, from previous times of this happening. And then when you trend, you basically take what they did and you go in that same direction. And Gary's kind of alludes to the fact that you don't have to do exactly the same thing that they did, but you go in the same direction that they did. He's not exactly like copying, but you're trending. You're doing something similar to what they did. So benchmark, what did others do? Trend, I want to do the same thing they did, but maybe a different, to go with this Baskin-Robbins theme, a different flavor of what they did. And that's how you get to those great answers. And again, your answer is going to, well, it should be in this possibility zone. Should be in this possibility zone. And these zones, the question and the answer go together in this possibility zone. Gary displays this in a graph where ability to ask a great question is on the y-axis. Ability to find a great answer is on the x-axis. And the possibility zone is the farthest out zone from there. That's like the results section. And the results come about from asking that great question, which again should be big and specific. And then the answer should be within the realm of possibility. Not necessarily within the realm of your stretch capabilities. But sometimes it is, I guess. Sometimes it is what you're furthest capable of. But if you want to really push yourself, you go into the realm of possibility. Next slide. Concluding slide. Just the big ideas from this chapter. Again, we want to think big and specific. Stay in that quadrant. And then as far as answers, you want to live in the possibility. Explore what is possible, what is not really comfortably known to you. Stretch, again, that stretch realm, those stretch answers are within your reach, but it's going to take a little bit more. It's going to take some energy, but it's still. And then the doable is like, oh, I've done that before many, many times. It doesn't really require that much effort. And you could kind of apply this to asking a great question. Well, is a 5% increase in sales doable? Yeah, I've done that before. Doubling your sales? It's kind of a stretch. Tripling your sales? Okay. I've never done that before. That's within possibilities. People have done it before. Let me benchmark that. And then let me go in the same direction that they did when they tripled their sales. So remember, think big and specific. Stay within that, or outside of that, I guess you could say. Stay in the possibility realm. Go beyond your stretch goals. Go beyond your capabilities and test yourself. And then how do you come to a great answer? Benchmark and trend. Look what people did in the past. Go in that same direction. Pretty simple ideas. I mean, this is nothing like too complicated, I would say, but powerful principles nonetheless. And guys, that is going to do it for this episode of Chee-Tash. Thank you so much for listening this far. The next section, we are getting into part 3 of the one thing, which is the results, extraordinary results, unlocking the possibilities within you. So tune in next time for that. So if you guys want, check that out. It was kind of like an overview of the lies that they tell us, and I should do another one for the for part 2 of this book, and just kind of breaking down an overview of the truth or the simple path to productivity. Maybe do a blog post on that for you guys. But thank you very much for listening this far. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.